There have been 2 bombings in Kabul at the airport. Well, one at the airport. There was clear intelligence that an attack was in the works. Last night, overnight, the State Department and Pentagon began telling people to evacuate the area, to get out of the area. Many people did not get out of the area because they knew they would not be able to get back, so they stayed. A short time ago, a suicide bomber exploded a bomb at the airport, and then a subsequent bomb exploded at a hotel where Americans were being held up pending evacuation. This is not a good situation. I'm just reading now. U.S. military is shutting the airport gates. The casualty numbers are growing. There will not be a last-minute evacuation now, it appears. The White House is saying that the vice president has been briefed on the situation in Kabul and is updating her. The president was in the Situation Room meeting with his advisors as the situation was unfolding. The top story at Politico right now under top news is GOP faces hurdles in push to make Afghanistan matter in midterms. Yeah, that's the top story right now. Here's what's going on here. Let me bring you all up to speed. The ISIS, not Taliban, ISIS has already taken credit for it, made the explosion. What you need to understand, your key takeaway here needs to be ISIS is an enemy of the Taliban and the United States. The Taliban would very much like for us to leave Afghanistan and never come back. ISIS wants to kill everyone. Everyone is an infidel to ISIS, including the Taliban. ISIS wants to fight the Taliban for Afghanistan, but they can't wait. Now, the problem with the narrative to some degree, what complicates it is, how did ISIS get into Afghanistan? Many of them were there already and in prison, and the Taliban released them from prison when they took over. The Taliban opened the prisons and allowed out even ISIS, and now ISIS is killing us as the Taliban is trying very hard to get us out. This is the problem that we're dealing with. It becomes more and more complicated the closer we get to August 31st, the deadline for us to evacuate the premises. It makes it harder for us to evacuate the premises when the people cannot get to the gates of the airport to get through to us. Delta Airlines, among others, is operating charter flights out of Afghanistan, trying to get as many people out. Multiple flights out of Afghanistan from various airlines have been nearly empty because the American personnel on the ground are not clearing people to get on the planes, nor are the Taliban allowing people out. So this bellyaching over 2 members of Congress going into Afghanistan and then leaving Afghanistan in the middle of the night, sight unseen, no one knew they were there until they got home and said what was going on, is nonsense. The complaint is that, well, they deprived people of seats on the planes. 1, they used the jump seats in the cockpits, and 2, no, they didn't, because a lot of these planes are leaving empty. The State Department will still not acknowledge the number of people who are evacuating from Afghanistan, and they're setting some dangerous standards. Here's Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State.
We're taking every precaution, but this is very high risk. As the President said yesterday, we're on track to complete our mission by August 31st, provided the Taliban continue to cooperate and there are no disruptions to this effort.
Well, there are disruptions to the effort, and now Norah O'Donnell on CBS has interviewed a top diplomat from the State Department about this. Listen to this very carefully.
The question has been raised, why didn't the U.S. get out Americans and our Afghani friends before the Taliban were able to take control of Kabul? You warned about this in a cable. Were you ignored?
We put out repeated warnings every 3 weeks to Americans going back to, I think, March or April. Each one in stronger terms: leave now, leave immediately. Never in my 40 years of working, since I began working at the State Department, have I seen such strong language used. People chose not to leave. That's their business. That's their right. We regret now that many may find themselves in a position that they would rather not be in.
Notice how they're blaming the Americans. Let me put in greater perspective what happened here. The American State Department was advising individuals you need to leave Afghanistan, and concurrently, at the same time, for those of you at Emory, at the same time, was sending out cables saying, don't come to the airport, it's not safe, shelter in place. And in fact, for the last month has been doing that repeatedly, saying you need to get out, you need to get out, you need to get out. By the way, don't come to the airport or go anywhere, shelter in place, we'll come get you. And now they're saying, we can't go get them. Talking out of both sides of their mouths. Now listen to this, also from CBS News.
We were talking about ISIS-K. We were talking about the potential threat of al-Qaeda, of the Haqqani network. And this question may be sort of unanswerable, but I'm asking you to draw on your years of experience in covering Afghanistan and the surrounding region. What's the point of detonating a suicide or a suicide vest at this location if you cannot go toe-to-toe with the Taliban? In other words, what are you trying to achieve? And I understand that in cases of terrorism, sometimes the goals are not very clear, but just understanding the dynamics of what's happening right now in Afghanistan, what's happened over the course of many years, what would be the point of doing this at this point?
Well, I mean, for ISIS-K, and let's assume ISIS-K is responsible for this, it's a win-win-win. First of all, you've got U.S. and British forces and foreign forces around that airport. You've got civilians, which they have shown in the past. I mean, I've seen them. They've killed hundreds of civilians in car bombs, usually attacks on the Hazara community, but these are religiously driven attacks. In this case, you've got the presence of foreign forces. You've got an opportunity to expose the Taliban, an enemy of ISIS, clearly now clear enemy of ISIS. And now, taking out civilians and taking out the airport. So it makes the Taliban look bad. It makes the United States and coalition forces look bad. And tragically, I mean, think of the consequences. The people that were outside that airport were so desperate, they were leaving every single thing that they had behind. They knew the risks. It was getting out in the crowds that there was going to be a suicide bomber that was going to attack, yet they remained. That's how desperate they were. And to meet this sort of fateful end is just, it's tragic beyond measure.
Tragic beyond measure. Also, had the Biden administration done a better job, it would have been preventable. That's the most important thing to note here, is that so much of this could have been prevented because all Joe Biden had to do was nothing. All he had to do was nothing. In fact, H.R. McMaster was on CNN earlier today. They were essentially asking him to call out Donald Trump and blame Donald Trump. And what H.R. McMaster said was, in fact, no one bound the Biden administration to this. No one required the Biden administration to maintain what Donald Trump did.
As you know, it was President Trump who negotiated with the Taliban, frankly, but also agreed to a withdrawal date of May 1st this year. Were President Biden's hands tied by that agreement, or could he simply have reversed it?
No. Okay. Now it goes back to that. I'm telling you that was not the original sin. That was one of the many sins here. Was the capitulation agreement of February 2020, negotiated by Zal Khalilzad, who was still representing the United States after all these humiliations. How is that the case, Jim? Right? Yeah. I mean, the Biden administration reversed a lot of Trump policies. They could have reversed this. I don't believe that the president's hands were tied, and they're not tied now. Why not withdraw Zal Khalilzad immediately? Why not make it clear to the Taliban that if there's another attack like this, or if you interrupt our evacuation efforts, that there will be severe costs, and maybe be willing to impose those costs? I mean, it's a question of will, Jim, really. And of course, as we go further down this path, your options get fewer and fewer. And especially if the mission is just to get out, what do you really expect our military and our diplomats on the ground to do?
That's H.R. McMaster. He was the national security advisor to Donald Trump. And he points out that one of the sins here was Donald Trump wanting to get out by May 1st. But that Joe Biden was not bound by that. He decided to not only double down, but also to leave the country at a time when all of his advisors said not to leave. This is the problem here. This is where we have this. This is the president of the United States, the logical consequence of his actions. The logical consequence of his actions. And that's the unfortunate thing. Multiple people dead now at the airport in Kabul. The State Department saying there are American casualties. Original reports is that American military personnel were injured, not dead. Now the State Department saying there are American and foreign casualties, military and civilian casualties. This all could have been prevented merely by the President of the United States doing nothing. That's the craziest thing. Doing nothing. The pictures that are coming out of Afghanistan, they're actually too awful to look at. Parts of bodies all over the ground. This is where we are. This is our crisis. Joe Biden made it. Surely you can't think that this is a good thing. And you know, the Democrats, they've hit on a strategy here. Essentially, the strategy is to say that, the media's doing it. It's the media's fault. No one would be upset with this except the way the media is covering it. And that's just not true. It's simply not true. Here's CNN's own national security analyst.
So, Peter, given what we've already heard from U.S. officials about the threat from ISIS-K and their desire to create mayhem at the airport, does a warning like this surprise you?
Not really. And, this is a sort of hostage crisis of the Biden administration's own making, where on the one side you have the date certain, August 31st, and now you have this, credible threat of violence, which could be from ISIS-K, but we can't also discount al-Qaeda, which has presence in 19 of the 34 provinces of Afghanistan, according to the UN. The UN is also reporting that in several months, thousands of foreign fighters have poured in to support the Taliban or al-Qaeda. ISIS-K has an ability to strike at will in Kabul. It bombed a girls' school. Dozens of kids died in May. So unfortunately, it's not just simply ISIS-K, but there are other jihadist groups that would love to carry out an attack that would embarrass the United States and also kill Americans.
Well, and just to reiterate, ISIS has claimed attack for this. ISIS has claimed it, not al-Qaeda, not the Taliban, but ISIS. All of this just sadly preventable. It's only going to get worse before August 31st. And the sad logical conclusion of this, that even members of the press are pointing out, is that this really does mean August 31st is it. Help will not be on the way to Americans left behind who sheltered in place because the American government told them to stay put. We will come get you, and then never came.